Liam woke a few minutes before the alarm. The same as always, the same as it had been for nearly 2 decades. 5:30. His body remembered discipline, even when his mind was doing its best to forget. He made the bed with the kind of precision that had nothing to do with habit and everything to do with need. Tight corners, flat surface, not a crease out of place. Then he stretched briefly in the cool half-dark of the bedroom, laced up his running shoes without turning on a light, and stepped outside. The mountain air hit him clean and cold. The peaks to the north were still holding the last of the winter snow, pale and indifferent against a sky that hadn't fully decided on its color yet. Somewhere between gray and a particular blue that only exists at altitude, before the sun has had its say. The trail wound up through a stand of lodgepole pine, the ground soft with pine needles, and a particular smell of mountain earth after a cold night, resin and stone and something faintly alive underneath it all. A creek ran parallel to the path for the first half mile, low and quick with snowmelt, the sound of it steady and indifferent to everything. His body moved the way it always did on the trail behind the house. Steady, controlled, each stride falling in exactly the same rhythm as the one before. Running was simple. Either you kept pace or you didn't. Either you finished or you stopped. There were no gray areas, no unexpected variables, no moments when the ground shifted beneath you without warning. He liked that about it. He was back inside by 6:15. Shower, breakfast, eggs, toast, nothing complicated. Black coffee, no sugar, no milk. He opened his notebook on the kitchen table and went through the plan he'd written the night before, confirming the day's order of operations before he committed to sleep. On the dresser in the corner, a military dog tag caught the pale morning light. He didn't look at it. He never looked at it directly, but he always knew it was there. He had to go into town today. He was running low on material for the workshop. A specific grade of white oak he'd been waiting on, and a replacement blade for the table saw. He'd need a second coffee before that particular errand. Small towns had a way of turning a 10-minute trip into something considerably longer when people kept stopping to talk. He wasn't unfriendly. He just hadn't come here to make friends.
If you're enjoying this slow burn romance so far, a simple like goes a long way in supporting my channel. And don't forget to subscribe to join me for more stories like this one. Now back to our story.
The cafe was warm and full of morning noise, ceramic cups sliding across countertops, the low murmur conversations, a child's laughter ricocheting from somewhere near the back. Liam ordered his coffee at the counter and turned to find a table. That was when he noticed her. A blonde woman stood near the exit, arms out, pretending to be something monstrous while a small, muddy boy growled at her from 3 feet away. She played along with complete commitment, crouching slightly, widening her eyes, making sounds that set the boy off into shrieking laughter. Her own laugh was open and unguarded, the kind that comes from someone who hasn't learned to be embarrassed by joy. Liam looked away. Too easy, too uncomplicated, like someone who'd never had a reason to be anything else. He didn't know why that irritated him. It just did. The woman behind the counter introduced herself as Emma, confirmed she'd heard he'd moved into the house at the edge of town, and wished him a genuine welcome. He thanked her, took his coffee, turned, and walked directly into someone. The coffee went first. A wave of heat spread across the front of his shirt. His hands moved on instinct, catching the woman by the waist before she stumbled backward, keeping her upright with a grip that was reflex, not tenderness. It was her, the laughing one. "I'm so sorry," she started immediately, reaching for the napkins on the nearest table. "I wasn't looking. That was completely my fault here." She was already blotting at the front of his shirt when he caught her wrist. Not hard, just enough to stop her. "You've done enough," he said. His voice came out flat and cool, slicing through the noise of the cafe. She went still, not frightened, more like someone who'd touched something unexpectedly cold and was taking a moment to recalibrate. She looked up at him then, a direct, unblinking look from eyes so blue they registered as almost startling, and instead of flushing or apologizing again, she simply reached into her jacket pocket, produced a small card, and pressed it into his hand. "I'm Sonny," she said. "That's my number and email. Send me the dry cleaning bill." Then she turned and walked out of the cafe. The noise slowly resumed behind him, Liam stood with the card in his hand and the coffee cooling against his shirt and was aware, dimly, reluctantly, that he had overreacted. He walked to his truck without looking back. 2 days later, Liam stood on the far side of the main street with Derek, the head of the local search and rescue unit, a broad, unhurried man in his late 40s, who'd been the one to show Liam around the property before he'd signed the papers. Their conversation was practical. Trail conditions for the coming season, terrain that drew inexperienced hikers, coordination protocols between the rescue team and the local rangers. Liam listened carefully and asked the kind of questions that came from someone who'd spent years thinking about logistics and threat assessment. But his eyes kept drifting across the street. Sunny was sitting on a patch of grass in the small town park, her jacket spread beneath her like a picnic blanket. A little girl, 3 or 4 years old, was moving through the grass with great deliberateness, selecting flowers, the early spring kind, small and determined and slightly bent, and presenting them in ceremonious fistfuls. Sunny received each offering as though it were precious. She brought them to her face, closed her eyes, and breathed them in. The little girl stumbled on a root in the grass and pitched forward. Sunny caught her in the same motion. Quick and easy, no alarm, the kind of response that didn't require thought. The child laughed. Sunny laughed. Neither of them seemed to notice that anything had almost gone wrong. And for a moment, something in the back of Liam's mind slipped. Another continent, other children, the crack of orange light across a night sky, and smoke rising from rooftops, and the sound of voices that were not laughing. He blinked it back, returned to Derek's voice, to the street, to the cold spring air. Derek had noticed the direction of his gaze. "Sunny," he said simply. "She inherited her grandmother's place here. Does freelance web design. She's good. Half the local businesses have worked with her." Liam didn't comment. "If you're serious about selling that furniture you've been making," Derek added, "you should talk to her. Things work differently in a small town. People look out for each other." A pause. "I'm guessing that's not something you're used to." Liam shrugged slightly. "I didn't come here for people." Derek looked at him for a moment longer than necessary. "We'll see." Across the street, a woman with a stroller was approaching the park. The little girl spotted her and broke into a run, calling out. Sunny got to her feet, watching the reunion with a full smile. And in the process, her gaze traveled across the street and found Liam. Their eyes met for a second, maybe two. Something passed between them. Undefined, quiet, over before he could examine it. The wind moved through the street and lifted her hair across her face in a sweep of pale gold curls. She reached up to brush them back. By the time she had, Liam had already turned back to Derek. The workshop smelled like fresh sawdust and linseed oil, and that was exactly how Liam liked it. He was working on the dining table, a commission he'd taken from a family 2 towns over. Solid white oak, the kind of piece that would outlast everyone in the room when it was done. His hands moved steadily along the grain, the sander humming at a frequency that was close enough to silence to pass for it. He wasn't thinking about her. He was, in fact, thinking about the angle of the table legs and whether the apron joints needed reinforcing, and the quiet was comfortable, and everything was fine, except that at some point, he couldn't have said precisely when his mind had produced an image of her face. That blue-eyed, direct look she'd given in the cafe, the one that held no resentment, only a clear and slightly curious assessment, like she was placing him somewhere in a mental catalog and hadn't decided the category yet. He set down the sander. The thing was, he'd looked at her website, not for any particular reason. He'd been searching for local service providers. It was purely practical research, and someone had mentioned her name, 3 different businesses in town, 2 more in the next county over. Clean design, intuitive navigation, good photography, most of it hers. She was clearly good at what she did, and he did, in fact, need a website. He'd been putting it off for months, and the table in the next room wasn't going to sell itself. He picked up the phone before he could think his way out of it. On the 3rd ring, she answered, her voice slightly cautious. He recognized the uncertainty of someone who didn't know the number or what might follow. "This is Liam," he said. "We met at the cafe. You gave me your card." "I remember," she said. "I need a website for furniture sales." I've seen your work. It's good. He kept his tone level professional. Are you available to take on a project? A brief pause. Then, yes, when works for you to meet and talk through what you're looking for. I'll send you options. We can meet at the cafe. Sure. I'll look for your message. Good. A beat. Thank you. He hung up. Then he stood in the quiet workshop for a moment, hands still dusted with pale sawdust, before he picked up the sander again and went back to work. Liam arrived at exactly the agreed time, which was the only way he arrived anywhere. Sunny was already there. She'd taken a corner table near the window, laptop open, a half-finished coffee at her elbow. She was talking to Emma when he walked in, and something in her expression shifted when she saw him. Not guarded, exactly, but recalibrated, like a person deciding in real time how much of her usual warmth to lead with. She settled on a measured smile and raised her hand briefly in greeting. Emma took their orders and disappeared with the particular tact of someone who'd known Sunny long enough to read a room. The conversation that followed was efficient. Liam laid out what he needed with the same clarity he brought to everything. The structure of the site, the number pages, the visual identity, earthy tones, clean lines, the photographs taken with natural light in the workshop, nothing staged. A simple commerce function for inquiries and commissions. He had a rough timeline. He had a budget. He wanted to see a first draft within 2 weeks. Sunny listened without interrupting. She asked specific, intelligent questions, not the kind designed to seem engaged, but the kind that showed she'd already started thinking through the architecture while he was still talking. She took notes in a quick, assured handwriting that he noticed without intending to. By the end of the meeting, they had an outline, a schedule, and a handshake understanding. Before she finalized anything, Liam suggested she come by the workshop to see the pieces in person, understand the work before she tried to represent it. She agreed. He was aware, walking back to his truck, that she had been neither intimidated by his manner nor particularly unsettled by it. She'd met him at the level he'd offered and worked with it. Most people either matched his distance or tried too hard to close it. She'd simply done neither. He found that, against his better judgment, faintly interesting. She arrived exactly on time. Liam was in the middle of sanding when he heard her car in the drive, and he'd taken off his safety glasses and was wiping his hands on a rag by the time she knocked on the open door of the workshop. She was wearing jeans and a light jacket, a camera bag over one shoulder, and she looked around the space with the expression of someone who immediately understood what they were looking at. He showed her the finished pieces first. A coffee table, low and long, made from a single slab of black walnut with a natural edge preserved. A set of floating bookshelves in pale ash. A bench in white oak with hand-cut joinery that he'd taken longer on than necessary because the geometry of it had interested him. Sunny moved through the space slowly, studying each piece. She asked about the wood, how he chose species, how the character of the grain affected the design. She crouched to look at the underside of the bench, running her finger along the joinery. She wasn't performing interest. She was actually interested. The walnut table, she said, straightening up. Is the edge treatment original or did you shape it? Original. I work around what the wood offers. She nodded slowly, filing that away. Then he showed her the dining table. Still in progress, the surface rough in places, the legs not yet attached. He explained the design decisions, the technical challenges, the particulars of white oak and how it moved with humidity. She listened without the glazed expression that tended to appear when he got specific. And when she asked a follow-up question, it was the right one. He became aware, somewhere in the middle of explaining his approach to mortise and tenon joints, that he was talking more than he usually did. He stopped. You should get the photographs, he said. She was already unzipping the camera bag. She worked quickly and quietly, moving around the pieces with photographer's unconscious sense of light and angle. She asked him to continue working at one point. She wanted to show the process, not just the product. And so he went back to the table and she worked around him. At one point, they were both leaning over a camera screen, reviewing a shot of the table's surface grain, and her shoulder nearly touched his. He stepped back without thinking about it, the movement automatic. She glanced up, didn't comment, went back to the camera. 10 days for a first draft, she said, packing up to leave. I'll be in touch if I have questions. Fine. She slung the bag over her shoulder and said goodbye, and he watched her walk to her car from the workshop doorway, without moving from the threshold, even after the car disappeared down the road. He stood for a moment in the afternoon quiet. Then he went back inside and picked up where he'd left off. The restaurant was the kind of place that existed in every small mountain town and served as something between a dining establishment and a community living room. Booths along the walls, a specials board that hadn't changed much in years, staff who knew the regulars by name and vice versa. Liam was there because it was the closest thing to a good meal that didn't require cooking, and he'd been in the workshop since early morning, and the alternative was leftover rice. He'd taken a table along the wall, which was what he always did, back to something solid and clear view of the room. He ate without rushing and watched the restaurant move around him, an outsider observing a system that was fully functional and entirely his own. When the door opened and Sonny walked in with two women he didn't recognize, the room registered in the small, instinctive way that rooms registered people who belonged to them. A server called her name. Someone at a nearby table said something, and she laughed. She was wearing her hair loose, those particular curls had a life of their own, and something about the way she moved through the space made it clear she was at home in it. She spotted Liam almost immediately. She didn't hesitate. She raised her hand and smiled at him across the room, wide and natural, as if the fact of him being there was simply a pleasant coincidence. He nodded back, offered what might have been a brief smile. He didn't get up. She rejoined her table, without making anything of it. The young server who worked their section took her time with Sonny's table. Liam noticed, because he noticed most things that happened in a room he was sitting in. It was not a habit he'd been able to turn off. The server lingered. Sonny laughed at something he said. He came back twice before the orders could reasonably require it. Liam looked at his food. It's not your business, he told himself. He looked back at the table. She was talking with her friends now, the server momentarily elsewhere. Her hands moved when she talked, not frantically but expressively, as if her hands were part of the sentence. He put his fork down slightly harder than intended. When she got up at one point and crossed the room in his direction, he kept his eyes neutral. "How's the food?" she said in passing. "Good," he said. She smiled, one of those brief, genuine ones that didn't ask for anything and kept walking. Liam finished his meal, left cash on the table, and made his way out. As he passed her table, he nodded once to the group. Sonny looked up. "Good night," she said. "Good night," he said, and pushed out into the cool mountain air. He drove home, taking the long way without deciding to. The radio stayed off. He was aware, somewhere behind his sternum, of something that felt inconveniently like lightness, and he could not account for it, and he did not welcome it, and it was there all the same. The email from Sonny arrived on a Thursday evening, with a short message that was entirely like her in its efficiency. First draft. Tell me what you think. He clicked the link, expecting to spend 10 minutes assessing problems. He spent 40 minutes going through it instead. The site was clean and entirely without gimmick. Dark background, the warm grain of pale wood in every photograph. Each piece given space to exist on its own terms. She'd chosen the images well. Not the ones he would have chosen, but better ones. Shots that caught the quality of light in the workshop in the late afternoon, the texture of cut oak, the shadow along the edge of the walnut table. It looked like the work. It looked exactly like what he made, translated into a language anyone could read. He sat back in his chair and went through it twice more. Then he picked up his phone. The site's good. A few photos I want to swap, I'll mark them. Otherwise, it's right. The reply came fast. Great. Could you come by tomorrow evening? My car is at the shop. Easier than trying to get to you. He looked at the message for a moment. He had no particular reason to go to her house. He could mark the photos by email. She could make the changes remotely. They could finish this without him standing in her living room. Anyway, he typed back, "Okay, tomorrow evening." Her house was small and well kept, set back from the street behind a low hedge that had been allowed to grow in loosely rather than trimmed to uniformity. When she opened the door, he could see immediately that the interior was a kind of space that accumulated things with intention. Photographs on the walls, books in stacks in the corner, a kitchen visible at the back with something on the stove sending warmth through the air. It smelled like food and pine and old wood. It was, despite everything, comfortable. Sonny had the laptop already open on the coffee table. They sat across from each other and went through the site. He marked 2 photos, suggested one rearrangement on the landing page, and she made notes with the same quick certainty she'd had at the cafe. The whole thing took less than 20 minutes. "That should do it," she said, setting down her pen. Then she looked at him for a second with an expression that was slightly uncertain, which was unusual for her. "Actually, if you don't have somewhere to be..." He waited. "I made lasagna this afternoon. My mom's recipe." She said it simply, without loading it. "I'd rather not eat it alone. It always makes me miss her more when I do." His first instinct was no. Fast, clean no. But something in the way she'd said it, not as an appeal, not dramatic, just quietly and honestly true, held him in place. "All right," he said. They sat in the living room while the lasagna finished in the oven, and Sonny talked about her mother. Not at length. Not in the way of someone who needed to be reassured about their grief. Just a few things. A diagnosis that moved faster than expected. A kitchen that was always full of something cooking. A specific quality of silence that had followed after. Liam listened. He didn't fill the quiet with words she hadn't asked for. "She used to say a person needed at least 2 hobbies," Sonny said eventually. "One that calmed you down, and one that pulled you outside yourself." "What are yours?" "Cooking and photography." She gestured at the walls. He'd noticed the photographs when he came in without quite registering them. He looked at them properly now. Mountain passes, tree leans in early light, old wooden structures, barns and cabins and footbridges, photographed in a particular gold of dawn or dusk. "That's near Estes Park," he said, indicating one. "Yes. I drove out at 4 in the morning for the light." She said it without apology, as if of course you drove out at 4 in the morning in the dark for quality of light over a particular ridge. Then she looked at him with frank curiosity. "What about you? Before the workshop?" "Military," he said, just the one word. She didn't push on it, and he was grateful in a way he didn't examine. "What about the books?" He said, after a moment. She laughed, a short, rueful one. "I threw out the dresser they were in. It was too small for all of them, and I haven't figured out what to do with them since." "You need a proper bookshelf." "I do. I just can't find one that fits this room." He looked at the wall beside the window. The light was good there. The space was right. He found himself calculating height and depth without deciding to, running through proportions in the back of his mind, the way his hands moved through familiar grain. The oven timer went off. Dinner was good, generous, unpretentious, the kind of food that made a room feel inhabited. They talked about other things. The coming tourist season. Her photography plans for the summer. He said more than he typically did over a shared meal, though he couldn't have said why exactly. And at some point he became aware that he'd been there nearly 2 hours. He left shortly after. He drove home slowly, the streets nearly empty. The town settled around him in a familiar way of small places at night. A few lit windows, the sound of someone's music from an open door, the dark bulk of the mountains at the edge of everything. Something in him felt strange, not uncomfortable, just unfamiliar in a way he didn't have easy language for. He sat in the quiet of his own house for a while before going to bed. He thought about the way she talked about her mother, the lack of self-pity in it, the clarity. He thought about the photographs on the walls, the way she'd said, "Of course you drive at 4 in the morning for the light," the way she'd looked at the workshop pieces, not to be polite, but because she was actually looking. She wasn't what he'd assumed in the cafe. She wasn't surface. He'd been wrong about that in a way he should perhaps have known better than to be. He lay awake longer than usual, and when sleep finally came, it didn't hold. The scream that pulled him out of it was sharp and fractured, the kind that split the air rather than filling it. He sat upright in the dark, breathing hard, his shirt already cold against his back. It took him a moment to understand the room, to let the silence register as actual silence, the dream, the same geography every time. Red light through smoke. A village in a valley he'd been responsible for. The particular sound of walls that had been destroyed by something large and fast. His best friend's voice on a radio that went out. The clock read 3:07. He sat on the edge of the bed for a while, steadying his breathing through the familiar deliberateness. This breath, then this one, then this one. It didn't make the images disappear. It just made the space around them manageable. He'd known it might come tonight. He often did, on evenings when the defenses were down. And they'd been down tonight. He could admit that, in the dark and the quiet, to no one but himself. Morning came regardless. His body ran the routine whether his mind was present or not. Run, shower, breakfast and coffee. He moved through each step with the automatic steadiness that years of discipline had put into him like a program, and he was in the workshop before the town was fully awake. He'd planned to start the chairs for the dining table. The wood was prepped, the measurements already marked. Instead, he pulled the sketchbook from the shelf and stood at the work table with a pencil in his hand. He told himself he was just working through an idea. The lines came quickly. Vertical slats, tapered uprights, proportions that would work against a particular wall in a particular room with a particular kind of afternoon light. He adjusted the depth twice, shifted the lowest shelf higher, refined the profile of the top rail until it was right. When he set the pencil down and looked at what he'd drawn, he went still. He'd been building her a bookshelf. He stood there in the sawdust and the morning light for a long moment. "This has nothing to do with her," he said quietly to the empty room. Then he left the sketch where it was and went to start on the chairs. The final version arrived by email that afternoon, and it was exactly right. Not almost right. Right. Every adjustment made cleanly. The revised photo sitting better in the flow of the page. The landing section doing precisely what he'd asked and no more. He looked at it for longer than necessary, then picked up the phone. She answered on the second ring. "It's done," he said. "Exactly what I wanted." There was a brief pause, the kind that holds relief in it. "Really? Really?" He heard the shift in her voice, not effusive, just genuinely glad. It would have been easy at that point to say thank you and end the call. It was what he would ordinarily have done. Instead, he heard himself say, "If you're free tonight, we could get dinner," to mark finishing the project. A moment. "Yes," she said simply. "I'm free." The restaurant they chose was small and opened to mountain air through a set of folding glass doors that led to a terrace. The conversation started, as these things do, practical, easy, recent. The site, plans for the workshop, the upcoming festival that marked the start of tourist season in town. Then it loosened. She told him about a school trip where she'd gotten so thoroughly lost she'd had to be retrieved by a park ranger. About a summer she spent almost entirely outdoors with a disposable camera her mother had given her, photographing everything. Insects, her grandmother's garden, clouds reflected in puddles, and how a neighbor had told her she had a good eye, and how that sentence had stayed with her for years. At one point, Liam laughed. Not the brief, controlled acknowledgement of something amusing, but an actual laugh. Involuntary. Full. The kind that happened without permission. Sonny stopped talking. She just looked at him. He registered her expression and felt something shift, an awareness of being seen that was faintly disconcerting. She glanced down at her glass quickly and said, "I've actually been meaning to ask you something." "Go ahead." "There's a spring festival this weekend. It opens the tourist season. I usually go with friends." She kept her tone easy, unhurried. "Would you want to come?" He should have thought about it. He should have given himself a moment to consider. "Sure," he said. She smiled. And somewhere in his chest, something went quiet in a way that worried him. He stood in his bathroom later that night and looked at himself in the mirror without meaning to. The man looking back at him was relaxed in a way he didn't recognize. Something unfastened in the jaw and the eyes, an expression that didn't belong to someone who'd spent years doing what he'd spent years doing. He turned on the cold water and pressed both hands against his face. This was a mistake. He shouldn't have asked her to dinner. He absolutely should not have agreed to the festival. He didn't know what had gotten into him, but whatever it was, it needed to stop. He looked back at the mirror. The unfamiliar expression was gone. That was better. That was the right face. He turned off the bathroom light and lay in the dark and looked at the ceiling and thought. He'd call Ray in the morning. They hadn't talked in months. Ray had his ranch out in New Mexico, a good distance from here, and a standing offer that was always open. If he went now, he wouldn't be in town for the festival. It would be clean, no scene, no explanation required. Just distance, the way he'd always done it, the way that had never failed to keep things manageable. Ray's ranch was quiet in the mornings, in a particular way of wide-open places. The sound of birds and fencing wire and horses moving through tall grass, the kind of silence that had room in it. They sat on the porch with coffee and watched the sun come up over the low hills. Liam's phone buzzed on the table between them. He looked at the screen. Good morning. Really looking forward to the festival today. Should we meet there? Or do you want to swing by and we can walk over with the others? He read it twice. Then he placed the phone face down on the table and kept his eyes on the pasture. Ray noticed. Ray had always been good at noticing. Everything okay? Fine, Liam said. They went out to the ranch later that morning. There was fence work and a section of the south pasture that needed attention, and the physical work was straightforward and absorbing in the way outdoor labor tends to be. By midday, Liam had almost managed not to think about the message at all. At lunch, he took the phone out of his pocket. 2 missed calls. A new message. Hey, you didn't answer, and I thought maybe you'd lost track of time in the workshop, so I stopped by. No sign of you or your truck. Still not picking up. Starting to get a little worried. Is everything okay? Did I miss something? He sat with the phone in his hand for a moment. He hadn't expected her to check on him. He wasn't sure, off the top of his head, when anyone had last checked on him. The thought surfaced, and he pushed it back down and typed a reply. All fine. Out of town. I'll be in touch when I'm back. The response came quickly. Oh! Relieved it's nothing serious. I really did get worried. Talk soon. He set the phone down and didn't pick it up again until Ray's kitchen was filling up with the smell of whatever he was heating for lunch. And by that point, the conversation they were having about a piece of equipment Ray needed for spring was sufficiently concrete to stay on. They went to a bar in the next town that evening. Country music from a jukebox, cold beer, the kind of place where no one cared who you were or why you'd driven 20 minutes to get there. The phone screen lit up on the table between them. A message from Sonny. You were missed today. Liam's hands went still on the bottle. Ray had seen the name on the screen. He'd also seen whatever happened to Liam's face when he read it. Because Ray had excellent eyesight and had known Liam for a long time. Who's Sonny? He said. No one, said Liam. Ray smiled in a particular way that meant he didn't believe that for a second. Right. Liam took a drink and said nothing. After a moment, she built a website for me. Okay. We spent some time together. A few times. And that's why you're sitting here instead of there. Liam gave him a flat look. Ray simply raised his eyebrows. I'm just observing. They sat in silence for a while. It can't go anywhere, Liam said eventually. Ray nodded slowly, the nod of a man who recognized that sentence. You know, he said after a moment, I used to say the exact same thing. He picked up his phone, typed something, and a second later Liam's phone lit up with a message from Ray. Just a number and a name. Therapist, Ray said. Works mostly with veterans. He helped me figure out how to stop living like I was still deployed. Liam looked at the number. Ray. I know, Ray said and held up a hand. You don't have to do anything tonight. Just save the number. Liam looked at the screen for a long moment. Then he saved the contact. The bookshelf was nearly finished. It had happened over the course of a week, the way the best projects did. Not from a plan so much as from a constant accumulation of small decisions, each one made with a specific room in mind. He'd use white ash for the uprights, the pale color and straight grain right for the space. The proportions were exactly what he'd sketched that morning in the sawdust quiet. He stood back from it now, in the afternoon light of the workshop, and looked at it. He knew it was for her. He'd known it since the first line on the page. That knowledge sat in his chest with an uncomfortable weight, because it was evidence of something he'd been trying to avoid being honest with himself about. Later that same afternoon, he drove into town for groceries. He pulled into the market parking lot and was reaching for his keys when he saw her. She was coming out of the automatic doors with a bag in each hand, her hair catching the sun, already halfway to her own car when she looked up and their eyes met. He saw it happen in real time, the initial surprise of recognition, and then the click of understanding as she put together. He hadn't shown up to the festival. He hadn't called. He hadn't texted to explain. He'd vanished, and she'd seen him do it. And now she was standing in a parking lot watching him sit in his truck like a man with no explanation to offer. He raised his hand. She didn't wait for whatever followed. She turned to her car, put the bags in, got in, and pulled out of the lot with a speed that was not quite angry but was unmistakably final. He sat in the empty parking space and didn't move for a moment. He'd known this was what would happen. He'd known it when he left. He just hadn't known it was going to feel like this. That evening, he sat in the workshop for a long time with Ray's contact on his phone screen. The bookshelf stood across the room from him, pale and finished, evidence of something he'd built for someone he'd then walked away from. He pressed call before he had time to change his mind. It rang twice. "Hello, my name is Liam," he said. "I was given your number by a friend. I think I need to talk to someone." A pause, and then a voice that was professionally calm and entirely without judgment. "I'm glad you called. Let's find a time." The Sunday light in the workshop was a kind that came in low and straight, cutting across the surface of the bookshelf and turning the grain amber. Liam was sanding the final edge of the lowest shelf. This particular one had been slightly rough, a small imperfection in the original cut, and he'd been working it smooth for the past 20 minutes with a patience that was, he knew, partly avoidance. He could admit that now. The therapist, he'd spoken to twice in the past week, had suggested that naming the avoidance was the first step to it losing some of its power. He wasn't entirely convinced yet, but he was trying. His phone rang from the workbench. "Liam," said Derek's voice without preamble. "We got a call. Emma and Sonny went out on the mountain this morning, one of the north trails. Ground still wet from last night's rain, and Sonny slipped. She's hurt her ankle, can't walk down, and Emma can't get her down alone." The sanding block hit the workbench. "Is she conscious?" His voice was automatic. "Calm. Yes, from what Emma's telling us. It sounds like a sprain at worst, but she can't put weight on it." Something in Liam's chest was doing something he didn't have time to attend to. "We're heading out in 30, Derek said. "I thought you might want to know." A pause. "I'll be there in 20, said Liam. The drive took 10 minutes. It felt longer. He drove with both hands on the wheel and the radio off, and thought about wet rock and steep ground, and Sonny sitting on a hillside in the cold. He thought about the slope of the North Trails, which he'd run 3 times a week since moving here, and knew the way he knew the inside of his own workshop. He thought about how much he had not said to her. He thought about the parking lot. His jaw was tight. He made a deliberate decision to relax it. She was fine. She was conscious. He was going to go get her off the mountain and bring her home safely. And after that, he was going to stop running away from things that mattered, because he was apparently incapable of doing that without it costing him something. He'd figure out how to say all of that once they were back on flat ground. The trail was narrow and wet. The spruce forest closed in on both sides of the path, dark and dense, the canopy blocking enough of the sky that the light came through in pieces, gray and diffuse, the kind that flattened shadows and made distances hard to read. The rain from the night before had left everything glistening and precarious. Rocks that looked solid shifted underfoot. Exposed roots were slick as glass, and the smell of wet earth and pine was so thick it was almost a presence in itself. Further up, where the tree line thinned, the trail would open onto exposed rock. Beautiful in dry weather, unforgiving after rain. The mountain had a way of making the difference between those two things very clear, very quickly. Liam kept his footing easily. This terrain was familiar, and moved with a 5-person team through a stretch of dense spruce at a pace that was fast without being reckless. Derek led. Liam was directly behind him. They heard Emma's voice before they saw them. Words. And then the sound of movement in the brush as she recognized the sound of their approach. The two of them came into view around a bend. Emma kneeling in the dirt beside a flat-top boulder, and Sonny sitting on the boulder with her leg extended, a makeshift bandage improvised from a scarf wrapped around her ankle. She was pale but upright, her jaw set with a particular expression of someone who was in more discomfort than they intend to show. Liam saw her before she saw him. He cataloged her quickly, the way he cataloged everything in the field, fast and systematic. Leg extended, weight carefully distributed, color reasonable, breathing steady. Alert. Then she looked up, and her eyes found him past Derek's shoulder. He watched the sequence of reactions move through her face in the space of a few seconds. Surprise first, then something more uncertain, and then something else, a hardening, controlled, but there. She'd been on a wet mountain with a hurt ankle, and the person walking toward her was the last one she'd expected, and that was entirely his fault. He kept moving. "Here we go," Derek said, crouching beside her. Emma let out a breath that had been held for too long. One of the team members was already opening the first aid kit. Another was assessing the ankle. "Possible sprain," he confirmed. "We'll know more at the clinic." Liam moved to the other side and knelt in the wet ground without comment. He didn't ask how she was. He didn't explain himself. This wasn't the moment for any of that, and they both understood it. His hands moved with the steadiness of long training as he helped stabilize the ankle for transport, handing over supplies, assessing the placement of the litter. He didn't speak beyond what was functionally necessary, but he didn't move away from her. When they lifted her onto the stretcher, she reached out instinctively for something solid. His hand was there before either of them had decided it would be. They looked at each other for a moment. Then Derek gave a word, and the team started down. Liam kept pace alongside the stretcher the whole way. The clinic smelled like antiseptic and recycled air. The doctor was efficient and thorough. He confirmed what the team had suspected: a moderate sprain, no fractures, the kind of injury that was uncomfortable and inconvenient rather than serious. 7 to 10 days off the ankle, he said, wrapping the joint with practice speed. Ice for the first 48 hours. Elevation when you're sitting or sleeping. Absolutely no weight bearing for the first 2 days. Sonny nodded. Emma was already reaching for her jacket. "I can drive her home." "I'll take her." Liam said it without thinking. Or rather, he said it before he could think, which was not the same thing. Emma looked between the two of them with the expression of someone extracting a complex social situation from limited data. Sonny said nothing. She gave a small nod that could have meant several things. He brought the truck around to the clinic entrance. The process of getting her in, the step-up, the management of the injured leg, the seatbelt, took care and attention, and he gave both without speaking. The drive to her house took 6 minutes. It passed in complete silence. Sonny watched the town scroll past her window, the hardware store, the diner, the park where he'd seen her that morning with the little girl and the flowers. All of it small and familiar, and exactly the same as it had been, except for the fact of the two of them sitting in this particular silence. Liam drove with his hands too tight on the wheel, knuckles starting to show, and kept his eyes on the road. At one point, he glanced at the rearview mirror and caught a reflection, her face angled toward the window, expression difficult to read. Still, too still, the way people went quiet when they were managing something. He looked back at the road. The truck stopped in front of her house. The engine went quiet. Neither of them moved to open a door. The silence sat between them. And for once in his life, Liam didn't try to control what he was about to say before he said it. He got out first, came around the truck, opened her door. She took his offered hand and descended carefully, redistributing her weight to the good leg. And they made their way to the front door at the slow pace her ankle required. He stayed close enough to catch her if she lost her footing. She didn't, but she might have. On the porch, she stopped and reached into her jacket pocket for her keys. "Thank you," she started. He held out his hand. She looked at it for a second, then gave him the keys. He unlocked the door, pushed it open, and stepped slightly aside. "We should talk," he said. She looked at him for a long moment. He couldn't read her expression entirely, only that she was deciding something. Then she went inside. He followed. The living room was the same as before. The photographs, the book stacked in the corner, without a shelf to go to, the lamp in the corner throwing its warm pool of light. She made her way to the couch and settled carefully, lifting her ankle onto the coffee table, and then folded her hands in her lap with composure that felt earned rather than automatic. She looked at him. "I'm listening," she said. Liam didn't sit. He stood in the center of the room for a moment, then moved to the window, then turned back. He wasn't used to not knowing what to say. He was used to silence being a decision, not an absence. Sonny didn't try to fill it. She waited. He stopped moving. I spent a long time believing, he started, choosing each word with care, that if I never built something that mattered, I wouldn't have to watch it be taken away. He looked at the floor. I told myself that was control, that if nothing got close enough to count, nothing could break you. He looked up. I learned that a long time ago, and then I learned it again more thoroughly during a peacekeeping deployment in West Africa. Sonny was entirely still. There was a village, a settlement our unit was responsible for protecting. We got word of an attack too late. We had a communications failure in the base, and by the time we reached them, he stopped, let a breath out. Most of them didn't survive. Several of our own men didn't either, including one of my two closest friends. The room was quiet for a moment, the kind of quiet that isn't empty. When I came home, I left the military, and I decided, consciously, deliberately, that it was simpler not to let anything get that close again. He moved to the back of the armchair and rested his hands on it, steadying himself. I've started working with a therapist recently, trying to learn how to stop living that way. A pause. It's not a fast process. I know that. He looked at her directly. And I know that while I was doing all of this deciding and controlling, you were someone I actually wanted to be around. She didn't move. I like you, he said, simply and without performance. Genuinely. But more than that, he paused. I like who I am when I'm with you. I hadn't expected that part. Something in her expression shifted, just slightly. I know it's not love, he said. Not yet. I'm not built to say something I don't know is true. But I think it could be, if I let myself get out of the way. He looked at the floor, briefly. And that scared me enough to do what I always do. He raised his eyes to hers. I ran. The silence between them was different now. Not the absence of words, but the presence of honesty. I was more afraid leaving than I've been of anything that's happened on a mountain or in a field or in any of the situations I was trained for. His voice was steady but low. I knew that on the drive out of town. She looked at him. I'm sorry I hurt you, he said. That wasn't right. And I'm sorry I disappeared. I know what that cost you. He held her gaze. I'm telling you all of this because you deserve to know, and because I'd like the chance to do this better, to stay. He stopped, said nothing else. Whatever came next was hers. She let the silence settle for a moment. I'm sorry about what happened in Africa, she said. Finally, her voice was quiet. I can only imagine what that cost you, what it's still costing you. She paused. Thank you for telling me. His eyes came back to hers. And I'm genuinely glad you started working with someone. I mean that, a beat. But, she said the word gently, without softening it past its meaning. What you did hurt me. The silence, the parking lot, the not being there when you said you would be. She shook her head slightly. I understand the why a little better now. But that doesn't change what it felt like. Liam absorbed this without deflecting it. I felt what there was between us, she continued. I know I did. I think you did too. Her gaze was level and clear, which is exactly why standing in that parking lot and understanding you'd simply left, without a word, felt so bad. Silence. And I want to be honest with you, she said, the way you've been honest with me. He waited. I can't be with someone who disappears when things get difficult. I can't build something with someone who goes quiet when it starts to matter. His shoulders had dropped imperceptibly. He looked like a man who'd heard the verdict he deserved. I'm sorry, he said. It came out quiet and entirely without qualification. I mean it. She held his gaze for a moment. Then, I don't need you to be perfect. He looked up. I know what it is to lose someone young. I know what that does to the way you move through the world. She paused. I chose to stay open anyway. I'd like to believe other people can learn to do the same. The room was very quiet. But if you want to stay, she said, and his attention sharpened at the word, then stay. Actually stay. No more running. He looked at her like a man trying to determine if he'd understood correctly. Is that? Yes, she said before he could finish. That's a yes. If you mean it. Something passed through his expression, something he didn't have a habit of and wasn't quite sure what to do with. He crossed the room and sat beside her on the couch. He took her hand carefully, the way you take something you're aware of the value of, and brought it briefly to his mouth. Thank you, he said. She leaned her head against his shoulder. They sat together in the quiet of the room, and outside the window the mountain light faded into blue. A few days later, Sunny was at the kitchen table, working. Her ankle was elevated on a second chair beside her, and her coffee had gone cold, sometime in the last hour because she'd forgotten about it, which was something that happened when she was absorbed in a project. She heard his truck in the drive before she saw him. She heard the door of the house open. He'd taken her spare key when he'd stayed to help her inside that first day, and she'd told him to keep it. And then the sound of him carrying something, the scrape of it against the frame of the door. She came to the kitchen doorway and saw him moving through her living room with pieces of something, pale, smooth, clearly finished. He set them against the wall and went back for more. She stood in the doorway and watched him. When he straightened up from the last piece and turned, he found her looking at him. Something in his expression was slightly uncertain, in a particular way of people who have built something for someone and are not entirely sure it will land. It's a bookshelf, he said. I can see that. You said you couldn't find one that fit the room. He gestured toward the wall by the window. I figure the light there is good, and the proportions should work. She crossed the room, careful with her ankle, and ran her hand along one of the uprights. The wood was smooth and warm, the grain running in long, clean lines. Pale ash. She recognized it from the workshop. She looked up at him. It's beautiful, she said. He shrugged, which was his version of accepting a compliment. She looked at the pieces laid out around them, all the components, all the careful work, waiting to be assembled into something whole. Then she looked at him. Will you help me put together? He smiled. That rare, full one that she'd been collecting since the night in the restaurant, the one that changed his entire face. He stepped closer, and when he put his arms around her and kissed her, it was unhurried, certain, the kind of thing that felt like a decision being kept rather than made. When he pulled back, she was still looking at him. Together, he said, and he meant it.
Thank you so much for listening. If you loved this story, please share it with a friend or leave a like to support the channel. Don't forget to subscribe for your weekly dose of original audio romance. I'm Elena Maris, and I'll see you in the next story.